They're cautiously optimistic, and I just smile and go, "Well, haven't you been cautiously optimistic for the last few years?" Yes, but yeah, but it's fun though. It's wide open. I don't think Kansas City is the Kansas City of the past.
I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, we'll give it about one more minute and let people pop in, and then we'll get you going. All right. Well, I will allow more people in when they show up. I just let a couple more people in, so there'll probably a couple more filter in by the time we get going here. But yeah, Amelia, good to go. If you want to go ahead and share your screen, I want to introduce you, and then we'll kind of get going. So those of you here to engage with Amelia, if you have questions as you go along, please do go ahead and put them in the chat. If you don't, if you're like me and if you wait, then you'll forget what you were going to ask. So put stuff in the chat. We should have time at the end of her presentation to do some Q&A and chit chat a little bit. But yeah, let's go ahead and get going then. I'm very excited to introduce Amelia Probst. She is a data scientist for PFF, Pro Football Focus, and she is on the consumer team there, and she's focused on fantasy football tools, sports betting, so should be interesting. Amelia graduated from Cornell University with a degree in statistics just 2 years ago. Congratulations. I got very young keynote speakers this year. This is fun. She previously interned with the New York Mets, the Premier Lacrosse League, and the Indianapolis Colts. And Amelia enjoys hiking with her dog Poppy and doing a little bit of baking. So I'll shut up. Amelia, the floor is yours. So thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me and thank you for the introduction. Yeah, like Russ said, my name is Amelia Probst. I'm a data scientist at PFF. And I thought we could start just with some basic background about me. I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina, born and raised. And then I went to Cornell for my undergrad and came back after I graduated. And I actually started as an engineer at Cornell and then quickly decided that was not for me. So that's why I made the transition to statistics. And that led me to having to think about what I was going to do with my major after I graduated. So that's what led me to sports analytics, and I'll get more into that in a sec. But yeah, I enjoy baking outside of football. That's like my hobby. And I am a Bills fan. My dad is originally from Buffalo, New York. So yeah. So a little bit about how I got here. Like I said, I switched majors pretty early on, and I had to figure out what I was going to do. I always grew up watching sports, playing sports, and I thought if I could combine sports and my major, that would be really fun, or I thought it would be fun. So I kind of had to figure out where I was going to go from there. So I reached out to people in positions that I thought I might be interested in, and that's how I got some of my internship roles. But I also got advice from them about working in sports, hearing their stories, and everyone has such a unique journey into how they got into sports analytics. So that was pretty cool to hear about too. And it also helped me figure out if working in sports analytics was actually what I wanted to do. So from there on, I had a few internships like with the Premier Lacrosse League. And I've worked for Cornell's men's lacrosse team for the past 4 years now, maybe a little bit more. And if you're not familiar with like lacrosse analytics, it's really not a thing like it is with football and baseball and these other sports. Like there's not just data available at your fingertips, like there's with other sports. So I was really watching film and gathering insights from that. So I would be physically plotting where like shots, assists, goals, and other stats were coming from. So essentially what I was doing was potentially confirming some of the coaches' priors about, maybe some of their upcoming opponents, things like that. So it really showed me what analytics is like kind of from the ground up and how I could really make an impact on a team. And the year I graduated, 2022, Cornell's men's lacrosse actually made it to the NCAA championship. So that was really cool. We didn't win, unfortunately, but it was kind of cool to see that some of my work helped them get to where they were. So that was fun. And talking more about my Premier Lacrosse League work, it was pretty similar to my work with Cornell, but maybe a little more advanced. Like they actually had databases and things with play-by-play information. So they track events during the play, like shots, goals, assists, more than that. So that was cool. I kind of had free reign with the data, and similar to my work with Cornell, they were still kind of getting their feet wet and figuring out what to do with it. So I had free reign, I created visualizations, things like that. And kind of similar to my work now, is that uh, I worked for all of the PLL teams essentially. So any work that I did had to be distributed to all of them just for fairness purposes. And then, yeah, I did work for the Indianapolis Colts on a volunteer basis more than anything during the 2021 season. So I would just generate reports after each game using R and NFL FastR that their director of analytics would look at. So it was pretty basic, and I was still getting my feet wet in terms of football analytics and figuring out how I can make an impact there, but that was still a cool experience nonetheless. I also worked for it's the parent company of the Falcons. It's just abbreviated AMBSE. And so they own the Falcons and Atlanta United and maybe a few other sports related organizations. So that was more on the business side there, doing sports ticketing, looking at consumer data, how we could get new customers, all of that. So we really worked with the sales team pretty closely to give them leads for new customers and just more information on our current or their current customers and how they could get new ones. So it was a really good experience, but I didn't see myself working on the business side long term. So it really helped me figure out what I wanted to do. And it actually kind of helped me in my current role as I work on the consumer side now, to see like how customers think, why they make certain decisions, and that kind of thing. And then my senior year actually of college, I was an intern for the New York Mets on their baseball analytics team. So I worked under their director of analytics and the assistant GM, and that was really a different level of analytics than what I was used to. So they have a very large team, like probably at least 10 people, maybe more now, that work on different projects ranging from sports science to catcher framing to anything you could think of, really. So even if I wasn't directly involved in those projects, I met with our whole group like at least once a week, probably more like twice a week, where everyone was brought up to speed on what they were working on, and you really got to see all the work that went into these different topics, which is cool. And my first project there was looking at how each team in the MLB spent their money and the WAR they got out of it, essentially. So looking at like the cost kind of per WAR, if that makes sense. So this work was actually given directly to the assistant GM and the GM. I don't know exactly what they did with it after it was out of my hands, but it was still cool to like interact with people that were that high up and took my work seriously. And it kind of showed me what the future of sports analytics could look like. Because baseball, as you guys might know, is pretty advanced when it comes to sports analytics. And the NFL is probably, I don't know, a few years behind. So it was cool to see that that could be a reality in the NFL in the near future. But my other main project outside of that project I just mentioned was looking at how different factors affect pitch spin, velocity, angle, all of these things. And at the end of my 3 months or 4 months, I presented that to the team, and that was just a really cool experience. It wasn't anything super advanced, like I definitely did some cool modeling, but yeah, it was just overall a good experience to get me introduced to sports analytics at a high level. And yeah, I had a really great experience there. And now onto my work with PFF. So I'll first like introduce you guys to PFF generally and what we do. So we're a data and analytics company, and we provide data and insights to all 32 NFL teams, as well as a large majority of NCAA teams. So we're most well known for our 0 to 100 grades that players get. So this is on a season basis as well as a game basis. And how that works is we grade on a scale from like -2 to 2. We grade every player on every play of every game in the NCAA, NFL, CFL, and more. And these -2 to 2 grades from each play are aggregated into these game and season grades with a certain algorithm. So that's really what we're known for. And it's been interesting in my time at PFF. I haven't gotten messages directly, but our like social team or like content team, they will get messages from players saying like, hey, like my grade shouldn't be this, or I shouldn't be credited with this sack, or whatever it was. Um, so it's interesting that players and teams like really actually pay attention to their grades and take it seriously. So that's pretty cool to see that our work is valued across the league. And our work is pretty objective, at least with these grades. So it's a pretty good way to measure how good someone is. Um, and then our company is owned, the majority owner is Chris Collinsworth. He used to be on the Cincinnati Bengals. So that's just a cool fun fact about our company. But we also provide data beyond like for NFL, NCAA teams. We sometimes provide data for player negotiations. So if a player is trying to get a better contract, they use our data or grade somehow their broadcast. So obviously Chris Collinsworth is a broadcaster now, and he uses our data and insights to add more information to his the things he has to say on the broadcast. I know some of our data is used in like the Madden games, things like that. So it's kind of used in a wide variety of industries, I'd say. So going more into my work at PFF. So like I said, I'm a data scientist on the consumer side. So I work mostly in sports betting and fantasy football, things like that. But my first project at PFF was actually looking at the volatility of offensive lineman performance. That was just something I was interested in because offensive and defensive linemen, I would say, are pretty understudied when it comes to analytics, which makes sense because it can be difficult to isolate one player on the line from another. So that was pretty cool. I got to do some content out of it, write an article about it. It might be a free article on our website, so if you're interested, go take a look at it. I'm actually planning to do some additional work with that in the future to like make it better and just do more research. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, my day to day, of course, consists of lots of meetings to discuss projects we're working on, upcoming projects, planning out our year, things like that. In the off season, we do have a lot more time to do research and things like that. But during the season, we are really focused on making sure our tools are working correctly. So we have like a mock draft simulator, fantasy football related tools, things like that, that we make sure are good to go and up and running every week because some people do use those for their fantasy football teams or betting or whatever. So yeah, that's one aspect of my job, but a large majority of my day is taken up by coding, mostly in Python now, but I definitely do a little bit of coding in R as well. So that could be data visualization, modeling, and documentation is also another important aspect of my job. So documenting our code and sharing it with managers or other higher ups and engineers, things like that. So they have a good idea of what we're working on. And if someone needed to go back that's either new or hasn't worked on a certain project, they can go and see what our work was like. And yeah, like I mentioned, a lot of my job is also consisting of collaborative engineering, especially with the consumer side. Like if like our product needs to go onto our website, that takes engineers work. I'm not an engineer, so we have to kind of work with them and like hand off our code to them, and then they're the ones who make the magic happen to get it onto our website. And another thing that sometimes comes up is writing content for the website, which is cool. It is something different that I'm really in the weeds with data for sure on a day-to-day basis, but it's something that kind of breaks up my day and it's fun for me to do to write about some of the work that I am doing. So that's fun. And then I get to like attend conferences like this. So I'm going to go more into detail on the next slide um, about some of the projects that I'm currently working on or that I've worked on in the past. So like I mentioned, the offensive line volatility work, that was my very first project. But another project that I've been working on over the past year has been related to fantasy football, which is our mock draft simulator, which is also on our website. So like one cool feature of it is predicting who will be available at your next pick. So the way the mock draft simulator works is you like log in, put in how many people are in your league, maybe you have any preferences, if you're doing like half PPR or PPR, all the different settings. And then you can like enter the draft and you play against CPUs essentially, but you pick who you're going to draft. So like say you take Travis Kelce with your pick. Maybe you won't want to do that now given hindsight, but yeah, that's like one thing. So you draft and you go through your draft and then at the end it gives you a grade. But one cool feature that I mentioned was predicting like what players will be available at your next pick. So if you drafted like second, and then everyone else would draft until the end of that round. And then it'll tell you what are the odds that like uh, let's see, like Patrick Mahomes would be available at your next pick. So essentially how that works is we simulate a draft given their picks, their previous picks, the number of rounds, given roster rules, all of that. So we simulate a draft a bunch of times, and that's how we come up with like the probability that this person would be available. So that's been a pretty cool feature that we added. We've added other features like linear drafting, like just things that we didn't have when we first created this tool, and people really seem to like it. So like I said, at the end of the draft, you get a grade, and it's just like a A through F, and I believe it also gives you a number grade. So the way this grade works is it's based on like how your team would do if players got injured, if you took like valuable players at your picks given the picks that you had. It's kind of like looking at your draft in hindsight. So like if you knew this player was going to get hurt, like do you have enough kind of replacement players to really continue to do well? And it also kind of looks at your team relative to other teams. And I think the average grade is like a 65 or 75. So if you end up doing this and you get like a C, don't be upset because that's like pretty average. And you never know what can happen in fantasy football. I've learned that the hard way many years. So yeah, don't be too discouraged by that. But a large bulk of my work over the past year has definitely been betting related. Um, let's see if I can go to the next slide. Yeah. These are just some pictures of the fantasy mock draft simulator. And then this one on the bottom left is related to betting. That's why I wanted to go to this slide. So I don't know if you can see it, but um, PFF is partnered with FanDuel, and we essentially give them insights for players or teams for specific games that are coming up. And how we did that was we created an LLM or a large language model that generates these insights for every game. So I'll just talk more about the process of how we started doing that. So we first had to create like example narratives. So like talking about Justin Jefferson and how he's going to do against a certain defense or against a certain cornerback. And then we used all of these narratives and we made probably created hundreds of them so we could train this LLM in the way that we wanted to. So it would spit out sentences about players or teams. And it would sound the way we wanted to sound and display the data in the way that we wanted it to. So that was pretty interesting. But that was just the first step. Our next step was using our raw data and aggregating this data into like on a season basis, on a game basis, like against the run, against zone, man, like all these different situations that we wanted to include in our narrative. So we had to aggregate all this data essentially. And we also had to model some data as well. So one example is with injuries. So like who would benefit if wide receiver one was injured? So we would predict like who would get the snaps from this. And we also found, interestingly, that defensive injuries are not as important as you might think. It's not as predictable in terms of snaps. Just because one potential reason for that is, if the backup cornerback is playing against someone like you don't know who they're going to be lined up against. So it's really a lot harder to predict how well like a defensive player would be if they were like a backup. So that was pretty interesting. So this is one example of data that we had to model that we wanted to include in our LLM. Some other data that we aggregated as well was like wide receiver cornerback matchups, which are pretty popular. Like looking at their past performance against like a defense, against a certain cornerback or something like that, their career performance. And another thing that's popular in the betting space is like looking at their last 5 games, the last like X games. How did they do? How did they perform? Because a lot of times their most recent performance is like a pretty good indicator. So that's something that we've also looked at, looking at their grades, touchdowns, receiving yards, stuff like that, over the last 5 games is really interesting. Um, yeah, like I mentioned, also having situational metrics, so like under pressure, when blitz, things like that. And essentially our goal with this is partnering with Sportsbook, we can better inform consumers without them having to go look somewhere else for this data. So you can go to the FanDuel or whatever sportsbook and you can click on this player and it'll show you like this little narrative about them, or like their last, like a graph with their last 5 like historical data, things like that. So essentially well, not we, but the sportsbooks pair these like game scripts or narratives with a bet, so that consumers can be better informed potentially. So yeah, that's kind of like the high level of our LLM work, but that's been really fun. Like I said, I'm not an engineer by trade or training. So I've learned a lot from this process. And as we all know, like LLMs and, Gen AI, machine learning, all of that are really big like buzzwords in data science in general, not just in sports. So that's been pretty cool to like be able to work hands-on with this. It's definitely been a big learning experience. So yeah, and then the last thing I just want to mention on the slide is on the right bottom picture is just an example of an article that I wrote. I had done power rankings in the past. I don't currently do that, but and you'll probably find this interesting as well. That obviously at PFF we try to be as objective as possible, but with my power rankings at least, they weren't subjective, but it was me and usually a group of 2 other people. We would get together and discuss, what teams we thought should go where in terms of the rankings. So obviously we used our data to back up those conclusions, but we did not use like a model or anything to create these power rankings. So yeah. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to talk about, since my work is so focused on sports betting and fantasy football, I think personally my view on the future of these 2 things is that more and more data will be available to us. So I think fantasy football is pretty advanced in terms of using data. Like I know people will make their own models and things like that. But I think there will be more data available to us that we can use to personalize either bets or like predicting fantasy football outcomes, live betting, and definitely more use of like Gen AI, machine learning will become popular. And I'm not sure if you guys have seen this, but um, I think it was NBA has partnered with Meta, and they have the like AR or VR like goggles that you can use, and you can watch like the games like real time and see stats next to the game for all the players and things like that. So I think more things like that will be integrated into fantasy football and sports betting. But it's really an exciting time to work in sports in general, but specifically like betting and fantasy sports, just because there's so much growth going on right now, and we're trying to figure out what's the best way to like tackle this, and how we can better inform consumers and all of that. So it's really a fun time for me personally. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to include my contact information in case anyone had any questions that maybe they didn't want to pose here. And then you can also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions or connect in any way. Please reach out. But yeah, I think the rest of the time we'll have for questions. And yeah, I'm happy to stay on and chat for sure. So thank you again for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Amelia. I see people saying thank you and all that kind of good stuff. So, good stuff there. I think we got time here to open it up to questions. If anybody has questions they want to ask Amelia about her work at PFF, fantasy football, all the gambling and all that.
I can't say I can fix your fantasy team. I cannot promise that, but
What was as you were going through your schooling and, like I said, you started off wanting to be an engineer or thinking you were going to be an engineer and then shifting into to learning data science stuff. I guess what was one of the experiences that was most influential to you in terms of, I don't know, what you felt like was the most important thing that you learned, or what was the turning point to really convince you that you wanted to do data science stuff?
yeah, so the first data science course I actually took, I don't remember the name of the course, but it was very hands-on and we used real world data, which a lot of times was not the case in my other coursework that was related to statistics or data science. So that being my first course, like really gave me a good idea of what the real world might look like. Obviously, the data sets were a little bit cleaner and easier to use than what I would have now, but it gave me a good look into like how data can actually make a real world impact. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And I would say my courses definitely prepared me for the real world, but uh, a lot of times some work doesn't always follow, statistical theory or all these assumptions that you have to make about modeling, things like that. So I think transitioning from the academic side to like the real world and my career, I kind of had to learn that and realize that, maybe these stakeholders or people higher up, like they don't necessarily care about the statistical theory and all of that. So I had to really learn how to communicate with stakeholders and other people that don't have like a data science or statistical background. And that's really, really key in being a good data scientist, I think, is learning how to communicate your findings and insights in a way that's easy for people who don't have like a math or statistics background to understand. So that's definitely something that I've had to learn through like my internships and my current role. And I think it's something that's definitely undervalued. And I wish I was like told that before I entered like the real world for sure. And I think that's not unique to sports analytics for sure. Like I think data science in general. Um, so yeah, communication is key and knowing like who your audience is, and obviously being on the consumer side, I've definitely learned that in other ways as well. But yeah, regardless of that, I think communication and knowing how to convey your insights is really important.
Well, what other questions are out there from folks? You can either raise your hand or you can unmute and start chiming in. We'll see if anybody talks over each other. What are some of the other areas that PFF does have work, right? So you're in the more in the fantasy and sports betting
Mhm.
side. There are folks obviously that are doing player evaluations. Are there other aspects of the work that PFF does that the average person watching Chris Collinsworth on NBC wouldn't know?
Um, I mean, like I mentioned, like our partnership with like Madden, things like that. Unless you play the game, maybe you know that. But so we're split into B2B or like business to business and then consumer, which I'm a part of. So there's still collaboration between both sides, but B2B is really where our data is given to NFL teams, or well, not given, they pay for it, but
Yeah.
given to teams or other clients. So they'll do more work with like computer vision and basically how to better like our grades or war or other stats that people like to look at. So I think that side is a little more kept close to the vest for sure. But like I was saying with like the PLL, with my internship experience there, like we had to give um, like the data, same data to every team, and that's basically the same in the NFL. just because I don't work for, or like PFF doesn't work for one specific team. We give data to all 32 NFL teams, and it's up to them to use it at their discretion. So yeah, I guess another thing that PFF does that is maybe not as well known is like we go to the combine and we meet with all 32 NFL teams and figure out ways that we can help them like better our products or things like that. I'm personally not involved in that because that's the other side of the business. But there are lots of cool opportunities like that that PFF gets to go to. So we really are pretty hands-on with like NFL teams, and we call it the service team, and they go on site visits and visit with every NFL team to make sure they know how to use our products and know how to get access to our data and how to connect it to film and all of that. So that's a really cool experience as well for me to hear about. I haven't been on a site visit, but they really are work pretty closely with NFL teams for sure.
Okay. Jessica Craker, I think you have a question.
Yeah, thanks very much for the talk. I really appreciated in particular what you said about communication and how that is intrinsic to what you do. So the question I have is related to how clean is the data when you get it? Do you wind up doing a lot of data wrangling? And if so, how would you recommend encouraging students uh, to value that non-glamorous side of
That's a great question. I would say, so for PFF data, I'll just explain the data collection process. So essentially we have a team, a very large team of part-time workers who their sole job is to watch film and grade every player on every player on every play. And that's from like receiving, coverage, passing, like all these different facets. So we have all of that. And we've probably been collecting data for, I don't know, at least 10 years, probably more than that. So longer than I've been around PFF. And so their process is pretty good, but there's some not even inconsistencies. Like for example, lateral passes are one aspect of our data that's not perfect because if you don't know, like at the end of some quarters, if teams are trying to score or whatever, they'll lateral the pass like a bunch of times. So we have to like record all of those as laterals. And anyways, that doesn't really matter. But that's like one aspect of our data that is definitely not clean. But I would say our data is pretty like reliable. Like I haven't really had any major issues besides like these outliers, like the lateral, for example. And if there's a lot of back and forth between like data science and our data collection team if we do come up with any issues. So I would say in my role, at least, I haven't come into contact with like a ton of data quality issues, but I definitely do a lot of data wrangling for sure. Like that's like that takes up more of my time than like actually modeling, I would say. So yeah, like you said, it's not the most glamorous thing, but it's something that's necessary. And like in order to be a good data scientist, I feel like you have to master that for sure. So I don't have any like specific advice to students or students in general, but I would just say that's something that is like really important because you could have a really great model, but if the data behind it is not of good quality, your output is not going to be good quality. So it's definitely a little bit tedious at times, but you find ways to maybe make it speedier or, you just are used to it as time goes on. So I think it's just something that you have to kind of get over the hump of and you have to do it because otherwise you're going to have other problems with whatever it is you're working on.
Thank you.
Roland, do you have a question?
Yeah, so I was wondering, is PFF doing anything to try to automate the grading process? So software that works straight with the video and comes up with
Yeah,
information.
so we're currently in the process of figuring that out, but at least when it comes to computer vision, it's not cheap and it's hard to get a algorithm that does everything that you want it to do correctly, if that makes sense. So getting like the same quality from like computer vision that you would these people, because the process that PFF goes through for data collectors, there's at least two, if not three people that grade all the players on every play of every game. Like there's people that do the same games, and then there's someone on top of that that goes back and like quality controls it. So there's a lot of steps to that process, and so far at least I don't think we found anything that is perfect, which is not to be expected, but nothing that's better than what we are currently doing, to my knowledge at least. So I think it's something that a lot of sports are looking into and trying to do, but it comes down to like a cost perspective, whether you want to pay people or you want to pay for this like software algorithm. So I think that's another thing that I see definitely coming into play. And I know there are lots of like startups and things like that out there that are doing that, but yeah, it's very hard to like replicate the process that we're currently doing.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts for Amelia? Okay. Well, thanks again. Let's give her a the old virtual round of applause again. Yeah, so again, thank you for your time there. I think you shared your contact info on your last slide. If anybody wanted to follow up with anything, Amelia has a nice Twitter presence. Oh, sorry, X presence, and yeah, your name and email is on the list of participants anyway. So if anybody needs to follow up, they can. I think we've got about a 25-minute break sitting in front of us then. So I think we'll go step out and get a sip of water, stretch our legs for a little bit, and we'll get back into the last part of the day, which is the last concurrent sessions. So Amelia, thanks again, and we'll get back at it at 2:20 Central Time.
Thank you again for having me. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and their time here.
Of course, yeah, and I'm recording this, so at some point someday, the video of your keynote, the other keynote, and some of the other talks, I'm hoping to get up on our website pretty soon. So if you, I rarely do this when I'm teaching. If you horrifyingly want to see yourself give your presentation, it'll be there for you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks again, Amelia.